What's up, beautiful? So I know you were wondering if I was actually going to be back with another video, and I'm not going to lie, I was wondering myself. But yes, I am back. I am back with another politics video where I just want to dive into some of the things that I've been following in the news. So we're going to talk about Jake Tapper's book that he wrote with Alex Thompson, former National Security Advisor John Bolton's house and office being raided, and then also the Epstein survivors. They've really been speaking out and trying to put a bill forth to release those files. So that's just kind of some of the things that I've been following in the media, things that I've been reading or whatever, and I just want to talk to you about it. So the first thing is Jake Tapper's book he wrote with Alex Thompson called Original Sin: President Biden's Decline, Its Cover-Up, and the Disastrous Choice to Run Again. It's pretty self-explanatory. That's what the book is about, like his time in the White House leading up to that decision to run for re-election. You know, what was going on with him around that time that he made that decision. A lot of people were not happy about the book because they felt like you knew all of this leading up to it, but speaking of Jake Tapper, you knew about all of this, but you didn't say anything. You didn't report on it. You were reporting that Biden's fine. He's fine. Not really sure what his actual argument to that is, other than I think maybe he was saying he didn't know for sure. There were whispers and rumors and that kind of thing, but he wasn't really sure because for the most part, they kind of locked everybody out of the administration. So you really were just going on the reports of his aides and things. And I really like that the book goes into, I think it sets the stage nicely for showing, diving into his history a little bit and shows what made Biden the man that he is and the politician that he is and how that led into him even making that decision. He had a lot of obstacles in his life. I think even his father had obstacles in his life. And so his father would always push for him to get up. You know, when life tries to knock you down, you get up again and you prove it wrong and you prove the naysayers wrong and you get up and you fight again and you win. And so they had so many encounters where they had to do that became a mantra almost that they lived by. And this very thing is what was going on in the administration. People who were in that administration, the aides and stuff who were closest to the president and First Lady Jill Biden, they were really kind of locked into this kind of group think where, you know what I mean? You don't really, Jake Tapper gives the example of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's something you don't tell a person that they're fat. You just kind of ignore that reality and just go on and do the things that you do or whatever. I think that was the exact example that he gave. It was something along those lines.
The president was fond of using the formal family motto of giving my word as a Biden. But they had another, more private saying: never call a fat person fat. It wasn't just about politesse. It was about ignoring ugly facts. Don't say mean truths, is how someone close to the family put it. The Biden's greatest strength is living in their own reality, this person told us. And Biden himself is gifted at creating it.
They didn't even acknowledge the obstacle in front of them. They might take note of it, but then they just kind of wiped it out of mind and just went along with okay, what am I supposed to do? And so it really digs into that history a little bit and sets the stage of showing how he became the person he is to have that kind of belief and how that belief turned into groupthink and how that led to him making the decision to run for office again. And so I was just really curious about it, because I'm a pretty I'm not nosy, but when it comes to certain things, I'm curious about it. I want to know what was going on in the White House, during that time. So, I read the book. Well, I didn't read the book. I listened to it on Audibles. And I just thought it was pretty interesting. Some of the things that came out of the book that I thought was really interesting is that when Biden ran for office, he initially, he really wanted Gretchen Whitmore to be, is that her name? Whitmire. He wanted Gretchen Whitmire to be his vice president, but Kamala Harris actually looked better on paper. So they ended up going with Kamala Harris. And it talks about how, once they won the election, she became vice president. They essentially cut her out after becoming vice president and really didn't do anything to help her. And they only did the bare minimum for her. And it talks about how they felt that the Biden administration felt that she shied away from certain tasks that Joe Biden stepped up for when he was vice president. So they kind of had this image of her, they just looked at her like she was useless, and they kind of made her feel like she was useless, and basically just really didn't do anything to help her. And some of the people in the administration, some of the aides, they felt like being loyal, doing anything for her other than the bare minimum, was showing disloyalty toward Biden. And that was something that they were really big on, showing loyalty to Biden. Similar to how people say that Trump wants people who are loyal to him. It shows that Biden actually had those people that were loyal to him. And actually, Kamala Harris, she just released a book, or is about to release a book. Maybe she released a few excerpts from the book. Actually, I think she did release the book, but it's called 107 Days. And it recounts her time when she became the nominee to run for president 2024. And, apparently she addresses some of those things in the book. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting, learning those little tidbits. And the reason why I think it's interesting is because, when you watch the news, depending on the kind of person you are, when you watch the news, sometimes you can kind of pick up on something that seems a little I wonder what's there, It was interesting to kind of dig into the that was there, because I was saying from the jump, it seemed like Biden was trying to sabotage her the whole entire time. Honestly, I felt even just passing the torch to her that way, I thought that was sabotage in itself, And the book even talks about that, how him waiting so late to make that decision to run how him making that decision so late to drop out of the race or whatever, it really didn't leave that much time for a primary, because a lot of people feel and I think it's pretty safe to say, if they had a primary during that time before just passing the baton to her, either some other stronger candidates could have emerged to run to possibly beat Donald Trump, or Kamala Harris would have had more time to kind of iron out the kinks and really become a strong candidate. Because while on the campaign level, Kamala ran a solid campaign. I remember I was constantly getting flyers in the mail, people calling me, seeing things, you know what I mean? So the machine was really in place to have a good campaign to really run. But the problem is when Kamala was doing a lot of interviews, it just really kind of fell flat, and she just didn't present herself as a strong candidate. And they were saying how she was evasive at times. She was defensive at times, you know what I mean? So she just wasn't really a good candidate in herself. But if Joe Biden would have made the decision not to run, she would have had time to iron out those things, and maybe she possibly could have won. So yeah, the book just talks about a lot of that stuff. I found a lot of that stuff interesting. Also, what I found interesting is that Biden had a strained relationship with Obama. I did not know that. And he had a strained relationship with him because Obama backed Hillary for president in 2016. And, Biden thought that was disloyal, he felt a kind of way. But the book kind of says Obama was really doing that to kind of look out for him, because apparently Biden was starting to show decline during his vice presidency, particularly and allegedly from the death of his son, Beau, and his son Hunter's drug addiction, and just always having him involved in some kind of scandal that really started to play on on Biden. And like I said, Biden had never, you know what I'm saying? Biden had had health challenges like back in the past. Like it was one time he was going to run for office, and he was pretty much set to run for office. But like right before, like I think right before he got in the race, he ended up having an aneurysm. And like he was having like the symptoms of having an aneurysm, maybe had an aneurysm, but he was able to like go to the hospital in time to like, you know, catch it and things and treat it or whatever. But the book was saying how somebody in the family had recalled that if he would have been on the campaign trail during that time, he wouldn't have stopped. Like he wouldn't have paid attention to like the symptoms that his body was facing. He would have ignored that and kept on the campaign trail. So when he had that aneurysm, it could have like, you know, taken him out or whatever. It was already like issues from even back in the day. So then like his son Hunter just like living the lifestyle that he lived, like always getting him caught up in some kind of like scandal or something like that, losing his son, like it really took a toll on him. And so I guess Obama was trying to look out for him. And so that's why he didn't back him in 2016. He backed Hillary Clinton. But apparently, you know, Biden felt a kind of way about that. I thought that was really interesting to learn. And speaking of his son Hunter and his drug addiction and stuff, I thought it was wild to learn that Hunter Biden started carrying on an affair with his deceased brother's widow. So Bo, the son that had died, Hunter started having an affair with his wife and got her addicted to crack. What? Like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, not even like got her addicted to like alcohol or even cocaine, like crack. Like, damn, you know? And I like that the book really kind of like paints the picture that it really was, or it seemed like it was, according to these accounts of like these people who came out and started speaking like anonymously and off the record and stuff. It appeared that like Jill Biden was the one running the show. And I thought that was really interesting because I could not understand for the life of me, like when all of this started happening, I was really looking at Jill, like, Jill, if all of this is going on with your husband, how you got him out here like this? Like, I feel like the responsibility of any wife is that when your husband is about to make that kind of decision, like whether you consider it reckless or whatever, like just really looking out for like the sanctity and sanity and health and mental health of your husband, you know what I'm saying? Like, how don't you be like, baby, I think it's time that, you know what I'm saying? Like, we've run a good fight. Like, we've been president, we've been vice president, like we've been in the Senate, like we've really done this thing. Like, I think you could really sit back and just like enjoy your legacy. You know what I'm saying? Like, I didn't understand how she could even let it get to that point. Like, there's no way I would have my husband out there trying to run for president and like, he was really in the throes of like mental decline, whether from just straight up aging or if there was something at play. So I thought that was wild. So I thought it was really kind of like confirming to see that Jill was like, it's according to them, like she was the one kind of like running the show, and her and Hunter were really pushing him to run for election and he could win and stuff like that. Apparently the reason why Hunter was even motivated to do that is because he was in some kind of, he was being investigated for something. I can't remember exactly what, but he was being investigated. It was kind of like in his best interest for his father to win, because then they could like settle that case or whatever, like, you know, put that to bed. So yeah, so they were really out there, like just really had him out there like, you could do it, like really trying to prop him up on, like, have you seen Weekend at Bernie's? You know what I'm saying? Like they was really out there like trying to prop him up like Bernie. Like, of course, like Biden is not dead or anything like that, but you know what I'm saying, in the movie Bernie was dead and they really like carrying on like Bernie is alive. So like I just thought that was very fascinating to like read. And then also what I found interesting, which is kind of like a theme of today's video, like a lot of Department of Justice investigations. So I didn't know this. I guess I wasn't following news at the time, or just wasn't really like paying attention to it, or perhaps the news didn't make a big deal about it, like the way they would make things about Trump. Biden was actually being investigated by the DOJ during his presidency. They were investigating him for possibly taking classified documents, after his term, after his VP, after his vice presidency. So the head of the DOJ, Merrick Garland, had appointed a special counsel investigator named Robert Hur to investigate this matter. And of course, Biden thought that was like very disloyal. So maybe if you go back and look at some of the old clips, you might see Biden kind of like, throwing like some little jabs at her or whatever. Nothing like too extreme or anything like that, but just a little, you could tell that there was something there, like he wasn't feeling him. But so Robert Hur was investigating him, and he basically concluded that Biden had indeed taken classified documents after his vice presidency, but he did not move to indict him or charge him because he felt like a jury would basically take sympathy for him and feel like he didn't knowingly do what they said he did. And when he concluded that he did do it, apparently he had an audio of Biden telling one of his family members that the files were down in the basement. But apparently the way that he was sounding on these tapes, like it just didn't sound like he really knew what he was doing. And so like in these conversations, him not really, like he was struggling to find words. He couldn't really remember. He was struggling. Robert Hur felt like there was no way a jury was going to convict him because they was going to feel like he didn't know what he was doing because he was not present of mind enough to know that he had committed a crime. So basically he would end up getting a not guilty verdict. So he didn't feel that it was, necessary to even move forward with charges. And possibly he was probably thinking about how that in itself could, be damaging to Biden's reputation. So maybe that's why he didn't move to, press those charges like that. But with him doing that and reporting this information to the DOJ, people around the White House kind of suspecting things, but not really knowing, you know what I mean? Sorry, y'all, the camera cut off. See, it happened. But I was saying he probably felt like that information in itself would damage Biden's reputation. So he didn't move to make the charges. But around this time, people are kind of looking to see okay, well, there's no way he can run for re-election. When are they going to talk about other nominees and stuff like that? Is he going to run or whatever? Because it was just there's no way he can run for president. So yeah, so that was that. That was the book. Of course, it's a lot more in the book. This is just kind of the things that really stuck out to me as I was listening to the book. But again, I just think it's a really good book, especially if you're someone who kind of likes to be a fly on the wall and see the things that are going on, especially in government, and White Houses. I think it's a very good listen, especially even if you're not someone that follows the news. I think it's good to give it a listen or read. But if you are someone who lightly follows the news, and sometimes when you do follow news, you kind of pick up on something something seems like BS, it's interesting to kind of read the book to see what those things are, to see if they kind of confirm some of your suspicions or whatever. I definitely feel like it did that for me, especially I said, learning all the stuff around Kamala Harris, because I just knew, I was they are setting this woman up to fail. They are sabotaging her, something is going on there. So it was interesting to learn that. And like I said, I didn't know that he wasn't in good graces with Obama. And that was something that people were talking about, even with Kamala Harris, why Obama waited so late to endorse Kamala Harris, So if you're interested in those little things, you like to be a fly on the wall just to see what was going on, I would definitely encourage reading the book, especially if you're someone that's how do we get here? How do we end up with Trump again as president? You know what I'm saying? Definitely read the book. I think it'll do a really good job of painting the picture. And if you're someone who listens to Donald Trump, not as gospel or whatever, but you're not someone who's a never Trump or just oh my God, Trump is the worst, whatever. If you're not a person like that, and you just kind of tune in here and there for Donald Trump, and you hear him always talking about Joe Biden and crooked Joe Biden and all those things, it kind of gives you a little bit of context of where Donald Trump is coming from when he you know what I'm saying, like makes those kind of like allegations toward Joe Biden. You get to see what that is based in a little bit, you know. And just like as a little disclaimer, I am not, if you don't know, if it's not obvious, like I am not a Trump supporter, fan. I ain't vote for him, none of that. I think Trump is a buffoon, like, you know. But I'm not one of those people that like just really like, I think Trump is absolutely immoral, you know. But I'm not one of those people that like sensationalizes like every little thing that he does, even though every little thing that he does is just like stupid, you know, but whatever. The point is, I just had to disclaim that. Like, I'm not a Trump fan, voter, supporter, none of that. But I just try to be as objective as I can. Moving along to John Bolton. Okay, so several weeks ago, John Bolton's house and office got raided. And apparently, let me go back to my notes. It was, oh, and I think I said at the beginning of the video, but John Bolton was Trump's former national security advisor. Just like a little history about John Bolton. John Bolton is like a right-wing war hawk. He's always worked in, I think like either the State Department. He's always worked in the State Department. Like he's really big into like foreign affairs, that kind of thing. Like that's where his career comes from. He's a very like tightwad kind of guy, like war hawk, just always ready to go to war. But even with that said, he's also a very like he takes his work and stuff very serious. You know what I mean? So he knows about international affairs. He knows about Washington politics, policy, international policy. Like that's his career. He studied up, he's a geek about it. But you know, he's just always ready to like go to war. And even in like, let's just say if you remove Trump from everything and just take like John Bolton in the Republican Party, like even in the Republican, like he's a figure that's demonized even in the Republican Party because he is such a war hawk, always ready to go to war, you know. Somebody said, I forget who it was, but they said that he's never seen a war that he didn't want to get into or he didn't want to fight, you know. So he's controversial, like even in that administration. I'm sorry, even in the Republican Party. Yeah, that's just like a little history on him. So his home and his office was raided several weeks ago as part of a national security investigation relating to mishandling classified documents, as well as the use of classified documents and leaks to the press. And so they raided his house, like looking for these documents. A little history on, you know, Trump and Bolton. Bolton worked for Trump as his national security advisor for 7 months from April 2018 to September 2019. And at some point they must have bumped heads, as you can imagine, because like John Bolton is a very like, you know what I'm saying, serious, intellectual guy. Trump is just not a serious person, doesn't really know what he's doing, just trying to like bully and bulldoze through everything. You know what I'm saying? Like, so eventually they bumped heads. And I think Trump had tweeted that he was going to fire John Bolton or something like that. Or maybe John Bolton got word, or he's seen how Trump fired other people from tweets. So basically he resigned before Trump had the opportunity to fire him. And at the time of him resigning or getting fired, however you wanted to look at it, he started writing a book called The Room Where It Happened. Now, according to Victor Davis Hanson, an American historian and the operator of the Daily Signal, he says that basically John Bolton sold his book on the premise that, you know, he was in the room where it happened and he took these prodigious notes and had an intimate knowledge of Trump's leadership abroad and at home. That's a quote from Victor Davis Hanson. So yeah, so, you know, he was selling this book like, I was there, I know what happened, I know how Trump is, I know how he is at home, I know how he is with these other foreign leaders, you know, I'm about to write this book. And this is around the time, because like I said, this is September 19, so this is right around the time of re-election. So the Trump administration feels like John Bolton is like, you know, disgruntled. He's just doing this to ruin Trump's election campaign or whatever, and he's working as a Biden surrogate so that he'll lose the election. And they were saying that he was using classified information in his book and was going to hurt U.S. national security. So what did Trump do? As Trump does, either Trump or the DOJ or the Trump administration, basically they sued John Bolton to try to stop the release of this book. And apparently this is like a matter, like days before the book is about to be released. So, oh, now let me just say, I read the book. Well, I didn't read the book. I listened to the book. And I probably listened to like 2/3 of the book, which I cannot wait to go back and re-listen to that book because it's so good. But, you know, just from what I recall from the book and what I heard from the book, it wasn't like John Bolton in the book, it's not like he didn't talk about any classified things. He was more so like he talked about things that were obviously like being reported in the news already. And he was talking about like the lead up to it. So like what his interaction was with Trump leading up to that, what Trump's interaction is with everybody else. So for example, he didn't say things like, we were debating if we were going to send a war hawk to Syria to do X, Y, and Z or whatever. He wasn't talking like that about like specific things. What he was saying is Syria did this. And we decided that we needed to put together like we needed 3 different approaches to approach this thing. So he didn't say what those 3 tasks or things were, but he said we were thinking we had to go through options. I was trying to give Trump my option, and he responded by talking about something in Turkey. You know, that's like the kind of detail that he gave. Like, I don't think he necessarily gave anything. But what do I know? Because a judge ruled. Now, the judge did not rule that he didn't rule to stop the release of the book, but he did tell Bolton that like, you need to watch it because you're coming up on a very close line, like a very fine line. And if you keep on and you cross that line, you could face like some criminal charges. So, you know what I'm saying? You need to be easy with what you're doing. And that's pretty much what the judge told him. As Victor Davis Hanson says, you know, the judge let it rest. The DOJ kept investigating, but Trump ended up losing the election. And when Biden's DOJ took office, they basically just like, you know, dropped the case. You know, like, I don't think it was necessarily like case closed, but they just dropped it. They stopped pursuing it. And so at that point, Bolton then goes on to become like this very outspoken critic of Donald Trump, like, and basically ripping him a new one every chance he gets. Let's take a listen to some of the things that John Bolton has had to say.
I'm John Bolton. I was Donald Trump's longest serving national security advisor.
Ambassador Bolton, you served as Donald Trump's national security advisor for 17 months. What was Donald Trump like to work for as president?
Well, he was very disorganized in his management style. I said in my book it was like working inside a pinball machine. Well, I think Trump's making that up. He certainly didn't have that conversation with Putin when I was in the White House. I think that that Putin essentially thinks that Trump is an easy mark. He doesn't respect him, but he understands that using flattery with Trump can get him a long way. I think if Trump did put together the meeting he says he wants to have between Zelensky and Putin, I think Putin would take Trump to the cleaners.
It's an incredibly serious conversation, and obviously the Ukrainians are deeply involved, but just to hear him describing it as, I mean, it sounds like 2 high school girls. I told him things that what I would do, and he said, no way. And I said, way. I mean, is that how world leaders talk from your experience?
No, it's not even how Donald Trump talks. It's how he wished he talked. And it shows he really doesn't understand what's at stake here. He knows very little history. He certainly knows next to nothing about the history of Ukraine and Russia. I think the hard men of history, like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, understand what their job is for their respective country. I don't think Trump understands what the job of the presidency is for ours. And I will say, having been in the room with him in meeting those people, having listened in on his phone conversations, I don't think they are really friendly with Donald Trump. I think they think, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un and others, they think he's a laughing fool.
Trump hired you, of course, about 10 years after you worked for President Bush. Your positions on military action were hardly a secret. What is your response to what you heard tonight?
Well, it's. I'm glad I'm still on his mind, and the comments are typically juvenile. It's yet another demonstration, I think, why he's not qualified to be president. He can't carry on a policy argument.
Can't Donald Trump make an argument against someone's foreign policy views without using violent imagery?
Well, I think this is very typical Trump. If you disagree with him, it's not because of some substantive policy disagreement. It's that you're not doing what he wants to do. It's really a children's playground kind of approach. Bob Kagan, whom I have a great deal of respect for, an old friend, wrote a lengthy piece a couple of days ago comparing Trump to Julius Caesar and the threat to the Roman Republic. Now, I'd have to say, Caesar must be turning in his grave to be compared to Donald Trump.
I think retribution is a major element of what Trump wants out of a second term. He's a man who feels endlessly aggrieved. Some grievances are large, some are small. He complained, for example, about a picture of a painting of him in a gallery of American presidents. Now, I don't know who has time to go through their pictures and portraits around the world, but Donald Trump does.
I just love John Bolton. Not necessarily him, but I love how intellectual he is and how he just reads him. I always say, John Bolton could definitely be a housewife on any of these franchises because he knows how to read down, okay? And I don't know, I get a kick out of it every time. But, okay, so what's relevant about all of this? It comes down to people are wondering, is this retribution where Donald Trump, under the guise of Kash Patel, is it just them or Donald Trump, going after his political enemies, or is there something there? Now, a lot of people, a lot of scholars, especially even the historian that I was mentioning, Victor Davis Hanson, they believe that it could possibly be something there for the simple fact that two separate federal judges from different jurisdictions granted the warrant. Apparently, in order for a judge to grant a warrant, there has to be some kind of new evidence. So people are really hesitant to just really blanketly say oh, it's just retribution. Donald Trump is exacting revenge because, if the judge gave that order, could there be something there? Which, when we move along to the next topic, we'll see how that kind of really doesn't mean anything, kinda, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, so some people are saying that it's very plausible that John Bolton could have taken classified files because, as we even see with Joe Biden took classified files when he left his vice presidency. Donald Trump took classified files from his presidency and refused to give them back. You know what I mean? So it's not really uncommon that people will take classified documents when they leave office. But again, because there has to be some kind of new evidence for a judge to release a warrant, they're kind of speculating and wondering, in addition to taking these files, or let's say he didn't necessarily take the files from the office, but did he email the files to someone? Did he leak the files, whether to his family as a way to skirt around taking them? Did he leak them to the press? Did he leak them to, other nations or whatever? You know what I mean? They're thinking could it be something like that? And that's what this new information is. Nobody really knows, but they're waiting to see what is this evidence that these two federal judges had to release the warrant. And of course, I think it's important to know, John Bolton has not been charged with anything. They were just looking to see. But, people are just really keeping their eyes on it to, again, see what that is. Was it all just BS and Donald Trump is just exacting revenge on his political enemy? Or again, is there something there? And why is it that the Biden DOJ just dropped the case? They stopped pursuing it. Is it because he became basically a darling of the left wing? Because like I said, we've seen Bolton on left-wing media, just like ripping Trump a new one. So people are just kind of like holding out to see what's going to happen here. But I can tell you that Michael Cohen, if you know Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, who he flipped on, he ended up serving jail time. I forget what for. It could have very well been having classified documents. I don't know. But Michael Cohen is advising everybody to lawyer up. And he said, if you did do anything, expect prison time, you know? Oh, which actually, speaking of prison time, I don't know if I said it. Actually, I don't think that I said it. If it comes out that Bolton had been leaking classified information to either the media or other nations, he would be guilty of the Espionage Act, and apparently that carries like some prison time, and like a hefty prison time. You know what I'm saying? So like, if he really did do that, he could really be facing some prison time. And Michael Cohen has said, if you did it, expect it. Moving along to the Epstein files and the survivors speaking out. So basically on July 15th, which actually, before I even go, let me set the stage as far as I recall. A couple of months ago, and this is what even attracted me to this story in the first place. A couple of months ago, when Donald Trump was pushing that big, beautiful bill, and Elon Musk was just like, he wasn't with it. And if you remember in my last video, I was saying we were going to do a video on that because Elon Musk and Donald Trump were feuding about the big, beautiful bill. And if you were following that story, then you know that Elon Musk dropped the bomb of like, you want to know why Trump hasn't released the Epstein files? It's because he's in them. And if you notice, ever since then, Elon Musk has not been in the news. However, Epstein has come back up in the news. And I guess maybe the backstory, I don't follow this whole thing, but I guess like maybe the backstory is that Trump's supporters were always calling for them to release the Epstein files, because when Donald Trump was running, that was something that he was always talking about. Like the conspiracy around it, and saying that he would release the Epstein files. So on July 15th, Representatives Ro Khanna of California and Thomas Massie of Kentucky put forth a bill calling on the DOJ to release the Epstein files. And the bill was called the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The bill wanted the DOJ to publish all unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in the DOJ's possession that relates to the investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. This includes materials that relate to Ghislaine Maxwell, flight logs, and travel records, and individuals named or referenced, including government officials, in connection with the investigation and prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein. To support this move, they held a press conference on the steps of the Capitol on September 3rd, with the survivors speaking out about their experience with Jeffrey Epstein. They were also making press rounds, doing joint interviews, and speaking out about it, trying to get the bill passed. Now, like I said, what initially piqued my curiosity, because like I said, that was what initially piqued my curiosity, is that all of a sudden Elon Musk just went radio silent. But I tuned into the press conference because my curiosity was then piqued again when Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell. I thought it was weird because, like I said, apparently Trump was getting a lot of pressure from his base to release the files. And I guess even the media had been like speculating and wondering, like, is he covering it up because he's implicated in the files somehow? And so as a way to kind of like respond to that pressure, he had this guy, Todd Blanche, go and interview Ghislaine Maxwell. And I thought it was weird that he was having him do that just to get her to say that Donald Trump wasn't involved in Epstein's criminal world like that. I thought it was irresponsible. I thought it was foolish, and I thought it was reckless. And I thought it shows just how like dumb and self-absorbed he is, that he would even risk giving this woman a pardon just to try to like clear his name, as if her testimony would even mean anything. She was already convicted on 2 counts of perjury, like lying to a federal court. So her word is not going to mean anything. She's a convicted sex trafficker and abuser. So to risk giving her a pardon for something that she can't even deliver on, it's just stupid, reckless, and tone deaf, you know? And then if the interview itself wasn't enough in and of itself, the insult to injury is that after she did the interview, she was moved to a minimum security prison facility, basically like a club fed. So it's just stupid that like Trump would even do that. But anyway, because I had seen that and then I saw like the survivors speaking out, I was really, curious, and I tuned in for their testimony, and I it was very interesting. And since then I've really been like digging into the history of this story and like going down the rabbit hole, and it's just like amazing the things that you discover when doing that. Okay, so let me give you a little history of what's going on. So there are basically two women who are integral for all of this coming to light and charges even being brought against Jeffrey Epstein. And the first is Maria Farmer, who was his former art scout and who used to work at the front desk of his Manhattan townhouse or townhome. And she was his first abuser, who alleged that he abused her in 1996. And she even discovered later on, at some point, that he had also abused her younger sister. When it happened, she reported him to the FBI back in 1996, but they basically, ignored it and didn't follow up with her until 10 years later when they started investigating him for assaulting a 14-year-old girl in Palm Beach, Florida. The mother and the girl went to the authorities, and they told the FBI how someone had approached her after school, asking her if she wanted to make some money by giving a guy a massage. And so the Fed started investigating him, and 2 years later, in 2008, he ended up working out a plea agreement where he got his charges lowered and pleaded guilty to soliciting prostitution and soliciting a minor for prostitution. Now, fast forward to present day, come to find out through some Bloomberg leaked emails, Ghislaine Maxwell had even corresponded with him on like what those charges should be. And Ghislaine Maxwell was the one that said it would really be good if you could like say that you were soliciting sex from a prostitute, like really trying to discredit the victim there. But, basically he ended up getting a sweetheart deal from Florida's Attorney General Alex Acosta, who actually went on to become Trump's labor secretary, or his head of labor in his first administration. He worked out a sweetheart deal with him where he only got to do a year in jail, and he was able to leave for work. And ultimately, he was able to he wouldn't face federal charges. Okay, so there's that. Now, fast forward another 10 years, and a woman named Virginia Guthrie sues Ghislaine Maxwell in 2015 for defamation. And the case is settled in 2017, but all of the discovery around it and like the new investigative reporting on it that was linking Jeffrey Epstein to the government and like covering up stuff and, working against the victims and things like that. And like just, like all these lawsuits being filed and all of the discovery around it. And it was particularly one lawsuit where the victim's lawyer, Virginia Guthrie, her attorney, Bradley Edwards, he sued Epstein for defamation. Because apparently, Jeffrey Epstein was basically calling him a liar in his denial of the claims, and this was like threatening the attorney's like credibility, his reputation. So he sued him for defamation. And this particular case, they were really looking forward to it because this was going to be the first time that the survivors actually got to give testimony, because up until that point, they never got to give their testimony because like they never either they never investigated it or they never brought about charge. Sorry, it cut off on me. Girl, this video about to be so long. Well, I promise we at the end. But yeah, there was never an opportunity for the victims to give their testimony because it never went to trial. So with this case, You know what I'm saying? Like, it was really gearing up to be like this explosive trial where you get all this explosive testimony. But to avoid having the survivors testify, Jeffrey Epstein ended up settling the case. So that settlement, in addition to the ongoing investigation, and again, like more lawsuits just constantly coming out against him, and now against him and Alex Acosta for violating the Crimes Victims' Rights Act with their 2008 sweetheart deal, that is what landed Jeffrey Epstein in federal custody. And so while all of this, I'm sorry, y'all. So while all of this is going on, a judge rules to make Virginia Giuffre's court documents public on August 9th, 2019. And so on August 9th, 2019, they made those court documents public. And the very next day, on August 10th, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in his cell. Like that in itself, you know? So now let me give you a little history of Virginia Giuffre. Or Giuffre. She was basically a young girl who was working at Mar-a-Lago as a spa attendant. And one day, Ghislaine Maxwell saw her reading a book on massage therapy. And, you know, Ghislaine Maxwell started chatting her up and basically, you know, at some point offered her a job as Jeffrey Epstein's personal masseuse. And it was either that same day or like, you know, shortly thereafter, Jeffrey Epstein ended up assaulting her. And they ultimately brought this girl into their ring where she was, you know, forced to participate in the encounters as well as recruiting other girls to do it. And, you know, she claims that, like, you know, she was lent out to Prince Andrew, among other high profile men, such as politicians and academics. And she says how, you know, she told Ghislaine Maxwell in their initial interactions how, you know, she was hard up for money, how she had been molested as a child. She bounced around in foster care. And how basically like all of this made her a prime target for them unbeknownst to her. And so basically like all of the discovery around this case and like all that was ensuing around this case with like the other lawsuits being filed, the investigation going on, all of that has pretty much led to Epstein's house of cards falling down and him even being brought into federal custody. Now, fast forward 5 years to like present day when all of this gets kicked back up again. Of course, I'm thinking because of what Elon Musk said. And like, you know, pressure and like, you know, calls to release the files, just like all that is going on. She ended up committing suicide on April 15th, 2025. So like a few months ago. And I actually just discovered last night that, so the way that Virginia Giuffre was able to get out of Epstein's ring is apparently he had sent her to Thailand to, you know, learn some massage techniques or whatever. And while she was there, she was supposed to bring back this Thai girl, you know, for Jeffrey Epstein or whatever. But she ended up meeting a guy. She ended up marrying a guy and they went off to live wherever they lived. I think it ended up being Australia. And that's how she was able to get out of the ring. But the guy that she married, I just learned from this documentary that I watched last night, and I'm going to link everything below. But the guy she married ended up abusing her. So like he was like physically beating her. So it kind of makes me wonder, you know what I'm saying? Like, was he a handler of her? You know what I'm saying? Like, did Jeffrey Epstein like release her to him to kind of like keep her under control or whatever? Because they were reading her diaries and she had an entry where she said like, it seemed like the more confident and empowered she got, because she was a very outspoken person about this case. Like she was very outspoken as far as like standing up for women and sexual abuse and sex trafficking, stuff like that. Like she was like almost like a poster child for it. And she was writing how it seemed like the more empowered she got and the more powerful she got, the more he would beat her, you know? So it just kind of makes me think like, was that a handler of hers? I don't know. But possibly because of that. Oh, and so also it was one day where he had beat her up really bad. She went to the authorities to try to either like press charges on him, get a restraining order, whatever. They ended up putting a restraining order on her where she couldn't see him. As a result of not seeing him, she wasn't able to see her kids for like 6 months or something. And apparently all of this around the same time is what led to her, committing suicide. Even though some people suspect foul play and say that, she didn't commit suicide. I personally believe that like maybe she found out that this guy was indeed a handler of hers, you know what I'm saying? It had some kind of connection to Epstein himself. And maybe that just kind of like took her over the edge. Like, you know what? This is too much. I'm never catching a break. Because like I said, if you remember, she was telling Ghislaine Maxwell how she had been struggling from the beginning, bounced around in foster care. Then she ends up in a sex trafficking ring. She thinks she's escaped it and married this man. This man is like whooping her ass, So yeah. Okay, so now let's go back to Maria Farmer for a second. So in 2002, Maria Farmer, who, like I said, was the first person to ever report Epstein back in 1996. In 2002, she was interviewed by a journalist, Vicky Ward, who was writing a story for Vanity Fair on who Jeffrey Epstein was, like who this mystery bachelor financier was, who was like really well connected and known around New York and was like giving President Clinton rides on his personal plane. Like there was like all of this mystery and mystique around him. They were like wondering like, who is this guy? So she was writing a piece for him for Vanity Fair. And in her research for the story, she came across Maria Farmer's complaint that was ignored back in 1996, and she interviewed her. Now, around this time, she's pregnant, and somehow Epstein gets wind. She tells the story of how Epstein gets wind that she's either interviewing her or had interviewed her, and how she's planning to write about it in her piece. And so she says that Epstein started calling and harassing her and threatening to have a witch doctor put a root on her unborn baby. Like, what the fuck, I'm sorry, y'all, but like this almost feels like a political suspense thriller, like movie or book or something like, but this is real life. This is what people's experience. It's crazy. But yeah, so he was threatening to do this if she continued on with this story or if she reported on it. And so she says that she turned in her piece to Vanity Fair and she goes on bed rest. And when the story comes out, everything is there except Maria Farmer and like the abuse allegations or whatever. So it's almost like this, if not glowing piece about Jeffrey Epstein, like a very palatable piece about Jeffrey Epstein. So, I guess everybody at the time, they leave it alone. But, Vicky Ward, like any good journalist, like she follows the story. She doesn't like pursue it like she's reporting on it, but she follows it. So when Ghislaine Maxwell goes to trial in 2021, she's present for it. And I'm assuming she was either like a witness in one of these lawsuits or investigations. And if she wasn't a witness for it, in that capacity, she was definitely somebody that people spoke about. She's definitely someone the media spoke to interview when they were covering the story. That's how I learned about her. So yeah, so like, hearing the accounts of like the survivors, their testimonies and like how the ring worked, basically like, through all of this reporting and investigation, they figured out how the ring worked, which was basically Epstein would have Ghislaine Maxwell find girls that needed money and would offer them a job to massage an old rich man. And so most of the girls did it. Now, one of the videos, which I'm going to link down below, I watched, it was one of the attorneys who was speaking out and was saying how pretty much like you had to have Ghislaine Maxwell to do this, because if just like some old white guy, like if Jeffrey Epstein just walked up to some, like 14-year-old girl at her school was like, you want to make some money by giving me a massage? the girls are gonna be like, ew, no, like, get away from me, creep, you know? But if you have a girl who's either your peer, your classmate, or even like, you know what I'm saying, this beautiful, sophisticated woman like Ghislaine Maxwell, who could promise you like a modeling career or something like that, you're more likely to do it. So, you know, basically most of the girls did it. And once they did, they were abused by Epstein. And apparently, like the abuse, when they went to the house for the massage, you know, the first time it would involve like the girls having to undress to give the massage. And after the massage, you know, either Jeffrey Epstein would give himself a happy ending, or he would have like the girls give him a happy ending or something like that. And I guess, you know, it escalated each time or whatever. And if the girls were uncomfortable doing it, either on the first time or the first few encounters, they were told by Maxwell that they could find other girls to do it so that they wouldn't have to do it, and so that Maxwell wouldn't have to do it. And so that was like the whole pyramid scheme of it all, like basically having the girls to bring in other girls. So like the abused is becoming the abuser, like turning into recruiters. And so a lot of the girls, when they were giving their testimony, were saying how they carried a lot of guilt from that, because not only were they assaulted, they brought in a lot of other girls to be assaulted just like they were, you know. But pretty much like all of the girls in their testimony are saying that, you know, Ghislaine Maxwell was like the mastermind and the facilitator of it all. And like, I guess depending on like the girls or like the mood or whatever, you know, sometimes Ghislaine would join in on the encounters and she would assault the girls as well. So yeah, so that's pretty much like how it worked. So like a few things that I just found really like jaw-dropping when I was going through all of this is that, because let me just give a preface really fast and say, it seems like there were two different camps. So it seems like there was a camp of underage girls who were being abused or whatever. And it seems like there was also a camp of like these really young girls who were like, you know, 19, 20, 21 or whatever. And so I guess, you know, Epstein could either traffic the young girls out to the people who like the young underage girls, or he could traffic out the girls who were legal but like still very young. Les Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secret, was Epstein's first investor, which I thought was mind-blowing, because that gives Jeffrey Epstein so much credibility with these girls, because if you're promising them this modeling career, you know what I'm saying? You have the head of Victoria's Secret. Like, what girl did not want to be a Victoria's Secret angel? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just found that so wild. But basically, he was his first investor, because apparently Epstein came up like really poor and just like all of a sudden like amassed all of this wealth. And again, Les Wexner, the head of Victoria's Secret, was his first investor. I think that's mind-blowing. I also thought it was very mind-blowing when one of the victims said that she was on the plane with President Clinton or Bill Clinton or whatever. And I'm assuming this is like right at the point where Bill Clinton's presidency is ending, I think, because it was like, I think it said it was 2002 or something like that, when Vicky Ward wrote the piece, because that's what attracted her to the piece. Like, who is this guy that is flying President Clinton around, you know? And that was also one of the things that the girls was saying made it seem like they couldn't speak out and tell anybody, because this guy is flying around the former president of the United States. Like, who's going to believe me if I try to say that they abused me? Like, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, also I thought it was interesting to find out that JP Morgan was the bank that Epstein banked with, who reportedly knew about all what was going on, and they basically turned like a blind eye. And perhaps many of the executives and the higher ups were complicit. I don't know, allegedly. I don't know. But, you know, that's kind of what it seems like, because that was the bank that was bankrolling a lot of his stuff, you know, or accepting the deposits, or not saying anything when Epstein was withdrawing a lot of these large amounts of money. And then most interestingly enough is I learned that apparently Jeffrey Epstein started his career as a teacher. Can you believe a teacher? He started his career as a teacher. And at one point he worked at a school that Bill Barr, Trump's former head of the Department of Justice, his father was a principal of. And apparently there had been, like, you know, reports and rumors and sayings back in the day that he was like creepy, and, you know, students saying that he paid more attention to the girls and he was just like really creepy and weird. So it's possible that, you know, Bill Barr's father knew some things, you know what I'm saying, like from back in the day or whatever. And I think it's interesting that Bill Barr's Department of Justice is the first Department of Justice who actually brought federal charges against Trump. You know what I'm saying? I think that's very important to note. Pay attention to what you might hear Bill Barr say about like all of this stuff going on. But yeah, so anyway, so since that story, since all of this was going on, that bill that they were trying to get passed, the Jeffrey, what was it called? The Epstein Files Transparency Act. Basically, the Republicans have blocked that. So that is not about to go into a bill. But, you know, there are calls. People are trying to like keep the bill alive. There's one person, again, I'm going to link all this stuff below. There is one guy who basically said in order to like come back up in the media again, they need to find a new angle. And that angle could be like looking at the money trail. So if Jeffrey Epstein was like this, you know what I'm saying, like really successful Wall Street guy or whatever, like let's see the reports of like all of the deals he's made and closed, and the money that he's made for people and the fees that he's gotten, things like that. The guy is saying if you look into that, you probably won't see a lot of that, because he suspects that Jeffrey Epstein was making his money from blackmailing the people that he was lending the girls out to. Because like I said, one of the most outspoken survivors, who's deceased now, Virginia Giuffre, said in her court case how the court case that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide once they made public, which I'm so mad I have that queued up to read that actual those files, that transcript. I started reading it, but it was just like a lot, and I was trying to like get all this together so I can get this video out. But I'm going to go back and read it. But like, you know, she says how she was lent out to these guys. Like she said, she was lent out to Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew settled that case. And she says that she was lent out to like other politicians and academics and stuff like that. So what this guy is saying is if you look at the money trail, you'll probably see a lot of deposits, like high amount deposits coming in from these certain people. And that's how Jeffrey Epstein was making his money, basically by blackmailing like all of these people or whatever. Of course, I think that's very interesting. And I do just want to say, like, here's the thing. So you can kind of tell when somebody hasn't gone down the rabbit hole on this whole Jeffrey Epstein thing, because they'll ask questions. Like when people ask, is Donald Trump in the files? Like that's an obvious yes, that Donald Trump is in the files, because all you got to do is look at video and you see that whatever prosecutor, whatever, is asking Jeffrey Epstein about his relationship with Donald Trump. You know what I'm saying? So like, yes, Trump is obviously named in the files. You know what I'm saying? Like you see that. And there are some files that are released. Like I said, Virginia Giuffre's court case, which I'll link that down below. So there are things that are already leaked, the things that are now leaked from the email, which let me just say, when I found out that they basically blocked the bill, I was like, oh, so if it's going to happen, it's going to have to come through leaks. And sure enough, the leaks have already started happening. But yeah, so they blocked the bill. And also interesting, what's happening like right now is last week, Kash Patel had to go in front of basically like Congress or whatever and like, you know, give his testimony of how he's been doing. And a lot of the questions, of course, revolved around Epstein and all of that's going on. So like I said, they are trying to, I feel like I didn't finish my last thought. The point that I was making before when I was saying how you can tell if a person hasn't gone down the rabbit hole because they'll ask if certain things is in the files, which you can already know that certain things are in the file if you just look at any of the reporting. But I think what people want is like that comprehensive, like just give me everything in this one document or this one place where I can just get like everything, you know what I'm saying? Because they like some things they'll release and make public, some things are still sealed or whatever. But now that bill is blocked, like I said, Kash Patel had to answer a lot of questions about that. I want to look at the whole thing, not just like the little clips that I've been seeing. But I think it's very interesting. We started on talking about like the survivors, like their testimony or whatever. So this is what the survivors had to say. So let me just say this comes from, oh God, in the moment I can't think of the guy's name, but from NBC. Okay, y'all. Let's land this plane because the camera done cut off or the battery done died. So anyway, this comes from a journalist of MSNBC. He was basically given a take on the survivors and how they feel about the bill not passing and Kash Patel's testimony in front of Congress. Let's take a look.
And today, by far, the most important thing said about the Epstein files and Donald Trump's FBI director's testimony this week about the Epstein files came from the women, survivors of the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and his criminal co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. Their statement should be heard in full. In a written statement, the survivors said they were shocked by Kash Patel's testimony, claiming falsely that there is no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked children and teenage girls to other people. The survivors' statement said, "We are struggling to understand what this means. Even the limited information that has been made public includes accounts such as Virginia Giuffre's report that Epstein trafficked her to other individuals besides himself. We also understand, as Representative Thomas Massie pointed out during the House oversight hearing, that there are FBI reports documenting witness interviews in which victims of Epstein and Maxwell named at least 20 other men they were trafficked to." Director Patel's testimony raises more questions than answers. For years, he has railed about the incompleteness of previous investigations. He is right about that. Previous investigations were indeed incomplete. So what is his plan to make sure that a thorough and unbiased investigation is conducted at last? He seems to acknowledge that the FBI FD 302 reports naming other men to whom Epstein, Maxwell victims were trafficked are real. So will he release those reports to the House Oversight Committee and to the public? He seems to imply that officials in previous administrations deemed those reports not to be credible. He has not read the reports himself. He has not spoken to the victims himself. And yet he plans to defer to unnamed officials from prior administrations who treated the reports as not credible. How can this be? Those previous administrations are the ones that Kash Patel spent years accusing of a cover-up. Now, he will pass the buck to them to decide that information about other men in the Epstein-Maxwell trafficking ring is not even worth following up on? There are victims and witnesses who, to this day, have still not been interviewed. Will they continue to be ignored? Survivors deserve better, and so does the public. We deserve answers to questions like these. Do the FBI and Justice Department have a plan to conduct a proper investigation at last? What is that plan? Will you release the FD 302 forms containing witness accounts of men to whom Epstein and Maxwell trafficked women and girls? Who were the officials in previous administrations who deemed the FD 302 reports not credible? Why are you deferring to that decision without reading the reports or interviewing the witnesses yourself? Given the number of times that survivors of Epstein-Maxwell abuse have been betrayed by the justice system, how will you ensure an unbiased and truth-seeking process that survivors can trust? Director Patel testified that the original sin of the Epstein case was the unconscionable non-prosecution deal that U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta gave Epstein and the limited investigation Acosta conducted. As head of the FBI, Director Patel can work now to remedy that in a way that finally centers survivor voices and finally pursues the whole truth. The public demands it, the victims deserve it, and our system of justice, without fear or favor, requires it. Survivors are waiting. Survivors are waiting.